government agency from 2005 to 2016. Here's the problem. Periodically, the headlines shout of yet another big tale of corruption at the Bureau, but the anger and indignation are not sustained. This corruption mess is deliberately downplayed by the customs cretins and consigned to the dustbin of journalism history, ably assisted by their cohorts of PR firms, always ready and able to summarily kill a story that puts the Bureau in a bad light. How many of you still remember the case 6 years ago of a customs clerk named Paulino Elevado, who was discovered by accident, literally, to be the owner of a pricey Porsche Carrera sports car? Aside from his Porsche, this Elevado also owned a fleet of 6 other luxury cars, 2 houses in an upscale subdivision. His salary, 9,000 pesos a month. Clerk pa lang yan, hindi pa bossing. It is time to bring the intensity of the war against drugs to the war against corruption. Ramdam na ramdam ang war against drugs. Araw-araw, ang daming napapatay. Pero, ang war against corruption, bakit wala na yata tayong naririnig na nakukulong? I have always believed that in the fight against corruption, we should always have one single standard. More importantly, we should not attempt to find who our allies, friends, or enemies are. Regardless of anything or anybody, corruption is evil. And there can never be, or there should be no compromise with evil. For over a decade, the Bureau of Customs failed to show improvement in fighting corruption. The most recent scandal, however, closely impacts the administration's war on drugs, the very centerpiece of President Duterte's campaign promises. In fact, drugs and corruption are the 2 issues that President Duterte emphasizes in his public speeches and media interviews as tops in his list of priorities. This makes the issue at hand more wanting and controversial than the same old stories of customs improprieties. Last Sunday, President Duterte has announced the appointment of PIDEA Director General Isidro La Peña to replace Bureau of Customs Chief Nicanor Faeldon in the wake of the 6.05 billion pesos Shabu shipment from China. Mr. President, I pondered that delivering this privileged speech today might be likened to beating a dead horse. However, Mr. President, I have come to realize that when it comes to national interest, you do not deal with just one horse. Instead, you decimate the entire stud. Nearly 3 months ago, media headlined a story of the seizure of local authorities of 604 kilograms of methamphetamine hydrochloride in a brokerage warehouse in Valenzuela City. The latest drug haul is estimated to have a retail value of 6.05 billion pesos. Initial reports indicated that the successful apprehension of a big haul of illegal drugs was a product of intelligence sharing and cooperation against cross-border smuggling between China and the Philippines customs authorities. However, Mr. President, you do not need a title nor a law degree to postulate that something was terribly wrong. The story as it unfolds sounds more like the inspiration behind the hit movie title, Kita Kita. First, kitang-kita natin because it was so obvious that the enormous shipment was successfully smuggled under the noses or through the indispensable participation of customs officials. Second, the huge amount involved showed the obvious. Kita ang kita. We can see the peso signs in billions. This exactly is what prompted the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee, led by Senator Dick Gordon, in aid of legislation to conduct an inquiry in what looked like the fast and furious smuggling of 604 kilos of shabu, contradicting the government's intensified war against drugs. During 4 public hearings, we have uncovered the identities of key personalities and their modus operandi. Kita ang kita. We can easily see the incomes of several customs officials. A self-confessed player, aka fixer, Mark Taguba, confessed about some payoffs. First, in an executive session, eventually in open public hearings. Yesterday, he presented few names at the customs officers and bagmen whom he had transactions with. However, Taguba did not spill all the beans. Kitang-kita natin. We discovered the labyrinth and lexicon of the criminal inside the Bureau of Customs. The consignee for hire, the selective lane mechanism, the payola system, the partner-in-crime relationship between Chinese nationals and our corrupt government officials, complete with middlemen and bagmen. It is a smuggling mafia out there, Mr. President, a criminal state that has no fear of government nor the President. Kawawa ang Republika ng Pilipinas. Suffice to say, Mr. President, that our quest to dig up how 604 kilos of shabu neatly hidden in 5 cylindrical roller printing machines from China managed to slip under the BOC officials' noses has opened up a whole cylinder of worms. During the hearing of the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee, Commissioner Faeldon admitted that he was aware of the so-called TARA system even before assuming office. He said he tried. His excuse? He could not investigate the matter because he was helplessly alone in eradicating corruption in his domain. To be more specific, Faeldon said, and I quote, "The appointment of the officers in charge in the probe was just December or January, so for the first 6 months, I was working alone." Boo-hoo! Tell that to the Marines, Mr. Faeldon, but not to this institution. Mr. President, records show that as early as July 1, 2016, he already hired the services of Gerardo O. Gambala, Milo D. Masrecampo, Attorney Mandy Therese M. Anderson, and Henry Anthony M. Torres as technical assistants, each receiving a monthly compensation of 40,000 pesos to 50,000 pesos. Kitang-kita the lies. Mr. President, even granting Mr. Faeldon's assertion that he was working alone, if he was the principled man that he said he is, he should have stood firm even if he was alone. As head of the Bureau, with the backing of no less than the President of the Republic of the Philippines, Commissioner Faeldon should have started the cleansing in the Bureau by eliminating what has been corrupting the agency for so long, the TARA system. Unfortunately, instead of going against the system, siya ang kinain ng sistema, thereby effectively tolerating and even promoting the impunity of corruption. Loud whispers in the four corners of the Bureau of Customs compound tell of a 100 million peso pasalubong to the newly installed commissioner, a quarter of which, or 25 million pesos, was retained as finder's fee by his middleman named Joel Teves. If in the AFP under a previous administration, you end your stint with the infamous goodbye pabaon, the Bureau of Customs naman, you start your stint with a welcome pasalubong. Holy mackerel, welcome pa lang, may kita na. It is an outright cash incentive, Mr. President. Accepting this pasalubong is a slippery slope. As they say, corruption is like a ball of snow. Once it has set a rolling, it must increase. Once one accepts the pasalubong, then the ball of corruption starts to snowball. At pag nasarapan ka, hahanap-hanapin pa ang dagdag kita. And just like taking illegal drugs, they find themselves addicted to bribes in exchange for favors. Tuloy ang ligaya ng mga korap. Indeed, loose morals will blur lines. How can we stop the importation of illegal drugs at the Bureau of Customs if the drug activities of its officials and personnel and the corrupt system persist in the seaports and airports? The issue at hand would have never happened if there was no collusion by someone with somebody from the inside, whether it is a middle-level official of the Bureau or all the way up. Kung walang kita, lahat makikita. Kung may kita, wala talagang pagpupuslit na makikita. Mr. President, everybody knows at the Bureau of Customs, it's everybody happy. They have the so-called payday, Friday, TGIF, Friday 3 o'clock habit, or whatever day of the week and hour of the day they now choose to make themselves happy and, yes, filthy rich. So many monikers have been coined for this joyous tradition at the Bureau of Customs, but all refer to a weekly assembly of several customs officials and selected employees where multi-million peso bribes, otherwise known as TARA, are given and divided up. Mr. President, for the past few weeks, I have been expressing my disbelief with President Duterte's unusual calm and gentle reaction to the alleged involvement of his people in customs to the massive volume of drugs that easily made its way to our controlled borders. Nevertheless, after weeks of public outcry here, there, and everywhere for the removal of Faeldon, President Duterte has finally acted and replaced him as customs chief, even for an quote-unquote honest man. Sabi nga ho natin, it is better late than never. Now, in case our distinguished colleagues are wondering how and from I got all this information, let me tell you as a background. Mr. President, with a little bit of exaggeration, si Nick Faeldon na lang yata ang hindi nakapag-ambag ng datos na ipapakita ko sa inyo sa mga susunod na sandali. Indeed, when the so-called customs payola or TARA hit the fan and made it to the headlines, information came pouring in. Quite a number of top and middle-level customs officials and employees, as well as brokers, even a civic-minded individual who has been gathering information on this matter for the longest time, started contacting our office. At least two of those I mentioned directly came to us to provide their own versions of the TARA list. From various sources inside and outside the Customs Bureau that I had interacted with over the past 2 weeks regarding the TARA list, we carefully vetted and cross-matched each and every information to come up with an objectively filtered and detailed list of who and how much each office or official in the Bureau collects per container per day. From the list furnished us by various sources, a standard TARA amounting to a low of 19,000 to a high of 45,000 is paid to the customs officials in the central office for each container. On top of the standard TARA paid to Customs Central Office, Manila International Container Port or MICP officials and employees also collect payola in the amount of 14,700 pesos on the low side and 23,700 pesos on the high side for 40-footer containers. Hence, the total TARA being paid for each container is from 33,700 pesos to 68,700 pesos. For a 40-footer container in the Port of Manila or POM, the TARA of the customs officials and employees amounts to 15,700 pesos to 26,700 pesos. If we add this to the standard TARA in the central office mentioned above, the total TARA ranges from 34,700 pesos to 71,700 pesos. For a 20-footer container, an additional 12,200 to 20,700 TARA for the customs officials and employees in the Manila International Container Port is added to their standard TARA, making a total TARA for its 20-footer container amounting to 31,200 pesos to 65,700 pesos. For the Port of Manila, customs officials and employees are receiving TARAs from a low of 13,200 to as high as 23,700, making the total TARA for a 20-footer ranging from a low of 32,200 to a high of 68,700. From this, the share of each office or person within the Bureau can range from a low of 200 to a high of 15,000 per container. Believe it or not, Mr. President, officials from the top offices of the Bureau down to those who monitor the gates and X-rays have their share in the TARA. What is amusing, Mr. President, ang mga dokumento at listahan ng mga tumatanggap ng TARA ay naglalaman ng halos pare-parehong mga pangalan ng customs officials and offices involved, bagmen at operators, maliban sa mga pangalan at siyempre naman ng mismong nagbahagi ng impormasyon sa amin. Having said that, it is almost an easy job to come up with a very credible TARA list. So, without much ado, allow me to proceed. Mr. President, I beg your indulgence as I have a lot of names to read from this list. Allow me to start with the list of alleged bribe givers or players at the Bureau of Customs. Tina Yu, Jerry Yu, Manny Santos, David Tan, Jude Lugarta, Eric Yap, Edvic Yap, Ruben Taguba and Mark Taguba, Noel Bonbalin, John Paul Teves, Jerry Teves, Joel Teves, Jan Teves, Ringo Teves, George Tan, Johannes Dennis Derama, Harry Tan or Henry Tan, Bim Castillo, George Wee, Attorney Venir Bakiran, Johnny C., Armando Burog Tolentino and Ruel Tolentino, Kimberly Gamboa, Bobot Sison, Marty Pimentel, a certain Eunice of Davao, June Diamante, Vic Reyes, Jerry Yap, Arnold Saulong, Hope Arnulfo Saulong, Boy Sabater, Nero Andal, Lia Cruz, Aying Acosar, and Eduardo Dio, Ray Tubig, Ruel C., Frank Wong, Chi Men, Jen Yu, Grace Bisaya, Arthur Tan, Charlie Tan of Davao Group, Anthony Nang. At this point, here are the names of identified collectors and bagmen. Attorney Christopher Bolastig, Turu Russell and Estrella, and Attorney Geneviel Lagmay for the Office of the Commissioner or OCOM. Nanico for Import and Assessment Service, IAS. Also included is a certain Lorna Rosario. Joel Pinawin, Oli Valiente, and Teddy Sagaral for Customs Intelligence and Investigation Service or CIIS. Attorney Laribert Hilario for the Risk Management Office, RMO, and Command Center for COMCEN. A certain Magic or Major Salamanca for Enforcement Group. Bien Rubio, Jerry and Diego Santiago for the Intelligence Group. Jasmine Obillos for Revenue Collection Monitoring Group or RCMG. Sia Otto and Roy for Assessment and Operations Coordinating Group. Bien Rubio again for Intellectual Property Rights Division. Attorney Tom Tagra for Legal Service. Boy Garcia for Accounts Management Office or AMO. Certain Mamadra, Bobadilla, and Mamao for Customs Collector in NAIA. A certain Honk for the Customs Collector in Subic. Efren Ambagan and a certain Giao for the Customs Collector in Clark. Alfred and Daniel Wagwag for the District Collector, Port of Manila. June Rapa for the Deputy Collector for Operations for Port of Manila. Attorney Alex, Attorney Mimi Aldabe, and Attorney Benil Bakiran for the District Collector, Manila International Container Port. Jason Kalinap for X-ray in MICP. Agama and Junjun Reyes for X-ray at Port of Manila. For the Enforcement and Security Service, ESS, for the Manila International Container Port, Orduña and Bundukin, with a certain Ante as runner, and Lino Arroyo for the Enforcement and Security Service, Port of Manila. Meanwhile, here's a brief summary of the amounts being regularly distributed in the Payola system. Please note that these amounts are given per container. For Bureau of Customs Central Office, the following are the standard TARA for its office or division. 5,000 pesos to 10,000 pesos for the Office of the Commissioner. 5,000 pesos to 10,000 pesos for the Command Center or COMCEN. 1,000 pesos to 3,000 pesos for the Assessment Operations Coordinating Group or AOCG. 1,500 pesos to 3,000 pesos for the Intelligence Group or IG. 3,000 pesos to 10,000 pesos for CIIS Central. 500 pesos to 1,000 pesos for CIIS Director's Office. 1,000 pesos to 3,000 pesos for the Intellectual Property Rights Division or IPRD, 1,000 pesos to 2,000 pesos for the Accounts Management Office or AMO, 1,000 pesos to 3,000 pesos for the Import and Assessment Service or IAS. For the Manila International Container Port and Port of Manila, 9,000 pesos to 15,000 pesos for the section heads, appraisers, and examiners in the Formal Entry Division for both MICP and POM. 1,000 pesos to 3,000 pesos for the Informal Entry Division for both MICP and Port of Manila. 3,000 pesos each for the MICP and the Port of Manila Collector's Office. 500 pesos to 1,000 pesos for the CIIS Port for both MICP and POM. 500 pesos for Enforcement and Security Service for both MICP and POM. 500 pesos to 1,000 pesos for both MICP and POM. 200 pesos for the Piers and Inspection Division for both MICP and POM. 1,000 pesos to 3,000 pesos for the Deputy District Collector of the Port of Manila. Official records from the Bureau of Customs disclose that on the average, around 15,000 to 16,000 containers are transacted for release every week at the Manila International Container Port and the Port of Manila. Of this, between 6,000 to 6,400 are approximately 40% of the total weekly containers have TARA. Mr. President, mayroon po tayong tinatawag na mga big players. Sila ang mga halos nag-ahari o namamayagpag sa pagpapalabas ng mga kargamento sa customs. A total of 390 to 490 containers per day or 1,950 to 2,450 containers weekly are being facilitated by the so-called big players, broken down as follows. 100 to 110 containers, care of David Tan. 800 to 100 containers, Davao Group. Taguba belongs to this group. 800 to 100 containers, care of Manny Santos. 800 or 80 to 100 containers by the Teves Group. 50 to 80 containers by Kimberly Gamboa. Finally, Mr. President, here are the recipients of the TARA Payola at the Bureau of Customs. Commissioner Nicanor Faeldon. Deputy Commissioner Teddy Rabal of the Intelligence Group. Deputy Commissioner Ariel Nepomuceno, Enforcement Group. Deputy Commissioner Gerardo Gambala of the Command Center. Deputy Commissioner Natalio C. Ecarma III of the Revenue Collection Monitoring Group or RCMG. Deputy Commissioner Edward James D. Buco of the Assessment and Operations Coordination Group or AOCG. Director Neil Estrella, Customs Intelligence and Investigation Service. He is alleged to collect also for the Office of the Commissioner, together with Chris Bolastig. Attorney Zay De Guzman, Chief Intellectual Property Rights Division. Attorney Larry Bert Hilario of Risk Management Office. Joel Pinawin, OIC Chief Intelligence Division of the BOC, also one of the alleged collectors of Director Estrella. Director Milo Mastrecampo, Import and Assessment Service, IAS. Attorney Grace Malabed, Acting Chief of the Account Management Office or AMO. Attorney Alvin H. Ebreo, Director Legal Service under Revenue Collection Monitoring Group or RCMG. All section heads, appraisers, and examiners in the Formal Entry Division in both the Manila International Container Port and the Port of Manila. Athena Dance of the Informal Entry Division MICP. All section heads, appraisers, and examiners in the Informal Entry Division in the Port of Manila. MICP and POM, Sections 1, 9, 10, and 15, Chief Appraiser and Examiner. For the district collectors and officers, the following names were mentioned. Collector Jet Moranilla of the MICP, Collector Rhea Gregorio of the POM, Collector Edgar Macabeo of NAIA, Collector Elvira Cruz of Cebu, Collector Marites Martin of Clark, Collector Talusan of Subic, Collector Reynaldo Galeno of Batangas, Deputy Collector Mel Pascual for the Port of Manila. One is already deceased, Captain Ticoy Gutierrez of Enforcement and Security Service, MICP. He was replaced by a certain Orduña. Mr. President, an unimpeachable source provided me with information involving a prominent customs official listed above. For the period covering May 16 to June 28, 2017, Mr. Customs official's total encashment amounted to 5,109 pesos with the following breakdown. 1.5 million peso check deposit on May 16, 2017. 1.2 million pesos check encashment on June 1, 2017. 699,000 pesos encashment on June 5, 2017. 1 million pesos encashment on June 8, 2017. 910,000 pesos encashment on June 19, 2017. 1.3 million pesos encashment on June 28, 2017. The TARA system, Mr. President, shows that there is a systemic corruption in the Bureau. In fact, for almost every office and official receiving their share of TARA, the Bureau can give the mafia stiff competition. Mr. President, the Supreme Court in the ruling said we cannot afford to fail either in combating the drug menace or in protecting the individual rights and liberties we have enshrined in our Constitution. Either way, the consequences of continued failure are hard to imagine, unquote. The drug problem cannot be solved by focusing on the demand reduction alone or effort alone. Hindi pa ba sapat ang isang taon at libo-libong napatay ng mga pulis at vigilantes para makita at mapatunayan natin ito? Since my days in law enforcement, Mr. President, we have always embarked on a two-pronged strategy in combating illegal drugs: demand or market constriction and supply reduction. True, hunting down big-time as well as small-time pushers and drug addicts in the streets may suppress the drugs market. But if our frontline government agency called the Bureau of Customs would allow, consciously or otherwise, the convenient smuggling of tons of shabu into our country, it is impossible to win the battle against illegal drugs simply because the supply reduction side of the anti-drugs strategy is failing miserably. Parang gripo, patuloy ang daloy ng illegal drugs sa bayan, toneladang illegal na droga. This runs counter to the policy adopted by the state as enunciated in Section 101, Republic Act 10863, otherwise known as the Customs Modernization and Tariff Act, to wit, it is the policy of the state to protect and enhance government revenues, institute fair and transparent customs and tariff management that will efficiently facilitate international trade, prevent and curtail any form of customs fraud and illegal acts, and modernize customs and tariff administration. This policy is in recognition of the important role that the Bureau of Customs plays in being the first line of defense against the threats that arise from international trade. The problems that our country is facing now, such as smuggling, fraud, and drug trafficking, can effectively be lessened if we only fortify our first line of defense on border management. Thus, it is incumbent upon us to address this Bureau of Customs issue head-on and at its core. There is a saying that every time we need to solve problems, we should dig at the roots instead of just hacking at the leaves. If we intend to remain committed to the war on drugs, we need a war on corruption. Mr. President, I have known the newly appointed Customs Chief, General Sid La Peña, as an honorable man. In fact, I can personally vouch for his integrity. With his appointment as the new Customs Chief, I can only hope and pray na hindi siya kainin ng sistema tulad ng nauna sa kanya. His highest calling at the moment is to descend to the gates of hell and destroy the brazen corruption within the country's most corrupt government agency. General La Peña needs to institutionalize genuine reforms, and by genuine reforms, that would mean the abolition of the corruption system from top officials down to the last rank and file in the Customs Bureau. Mr. President, I believe nothing will happen if we do not address the moral bankruptcy that is intrinsic among the officials and members of the Bureau of Customs. We should not turn our heads too far from the deeper issue that holds back the progress of our nation. Henceforth, it is also high time to send off an all-out sustained war against corruption. And the battle starts at the Bureau of Customs. I firmly believe, then and now, that it is the only way we can build a better, more progressive future for this country. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Lacson.
President, may we recognize Senator Aquino?
Senator Aquino is recognized.
Senator Lacson will agree to intervene.
Thank you, Majority Floor Leader. Unang-una po sa lahat, let me commend the good gentleman for his report. Maraming salamat, Senator Lacson.
Thank you very much. Maraming salamat din po, Your Honor.
Senator Lacson, would you be amenable? Mr. President, would you be amenable to a few questions?
Yes, of course. My pleasure, my privilege.
Mr. President, ito pong nailabas niyo pong data, marami pong mga nagbigay po sa inyo ng datos na yan. No? And we had been talking previously that you had cross-referenced a lot of the data before you gave your privilege speech.
Yes, that is correct, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President.
Mr. President, yung mga lumalabas pong mga paratang ni Mark Taguba dun sa ating Blue Ribbon Committee hearings, does it coincide with the data that you have received? Mukha po bang nagsasalita ng totoo, nagsasabi po ng totoo, o mali-mali po yung mga binibigay po niyang mga pangalan at mga datos dun sa komite?
Yung testimonya ni Mark Taguba, ang una naming natanggap na dokumento, at tama po, tumatama iyon sa mga iba pang mga listahan at dokumento na nakarating sa aming opisina. Dangan nga lang at kulang yung kay Mark Taguba. Hindi po nahagip yung ibang mga information na nakapaloob dito sa ating privilege speech.
Pero doon po sa mga naibigay niya mga pangalan, mukhang tumatama naman po doon sa nakuha po niyong data.
Hindi lang mukhang tumatama, talagang tumama.